Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
It was on June 12th, back in 1987, that Ronald Reagan stood in front of the Berlin Wall at the Brandenburg Gate and challenged the supposed reformer Mikhail Gorbachev, saying, "Tear down this wall." To me, it is a marvelous demonstration of the power of simplicity. To Reagan's critics, it wasn't so much simplicity as simple-mindedness. They thought he was a simpleton. But the fact is that Reagan had a great gift of clarity, economic as well as moral. It's a remarkable fact that Reagan always knew the Soviet economy was a failure. You see, he understood that central planning couldn't work, so he wasn't deceived by sophistry or by econometrics. He knew the thing was doomed, and he knew it was running itself into the ground. He also understood that communism could never satisfy the human spirit. He appeared before the British Parliament in 1982 and said that communism was a bizarre chapter in human history and it would soon be on the ash heap of history. And it's characteristic of Reagan's puckish sense of humor that he was in fact paraphrasing Leon Trotsky, who said the same thing about the Mensheviks many decades earlier. Reagan's critics, of course, figured he'd never read a book in his life, so they didn't get the reference. Nor, I think, did they understand the invocation of pop culture when he said, "Tear down this wall," about Pink Floyd's enormously successful 1979 album, The Wall. But there was a much deeper point to be made. That Reagan understood that the Berlin Wall was a symbol and an instrument of enslavement. Especially after the eruption of the 1960s, there was a considerable tendency toward moral equivalence, to the theory that NATO and the Warsaw Pact were really mirror images of one another, something which, oddly enough, Bill Clinton even endorsed at one point. But it wasn't true. The Soviets lied. When they put up the Berlin Wall, they said it was to keep spies and saboteurs out. But it wasn't. It was to keep people from escaping to freedom. And Reagan knew it, and he said it out loud. He said, if Mikhail Gorbachev is a reformer, why does he keep his people in prison? 2 years later, the Berlin Wall did come down, and 2 years after that, as Reagan had understood that it must, opening the borders destroyed communism. In fact, there was a joke from the Brezhnev era where Brezhnev says to Prime Minister Kosygin that there's all this talk about free immigration. Kosygin says, well, gee, Leonid, why don't we open the borders? And Brezhnev says, I would, but I'm afraid we'd be the only two left. Kosygin looks at him and says, you and who else? See, Reagan knew all along that communism was a failure, an economic failure and a moral failure, and he wasn't afraid to say it. And when you say it out loud, it makes a difference. Now, to be sure, it was in worse shape in 1987 than it had been in, say, 1967. Reagan was the right man in the right place at the right time. But he knew what to say and how to say it. As early as 1977, he told a prospective employee, here's my theory of the Cold War. We win, they lose. And again, he sounded like a simpleton to the sophisticates when he talked like that, but he was right. And when he told Gorbachev, tear down this wall, he gave Gorbachev no choice. There we have the power of simplicity in geopolitics, and I venture to suggest we could use more of it today as well.